Now, the UK inquiry into the death of a former Russian spy in London says Russian President Vladimir Putin probably approved the killing of Alexander Litvinenko. He was murdered in 2006, and at the time of his death, he was a British citizen and a part-time agent for MI6. Litvinenko's widow is calling on the UK government to do more.
It's a time for David Cameron. I'm calling immediately for expulsion from the UK of all Russian intelligence operatives, whether from the FSB, who murdered Sasha, or from other Russian agencies based on the London embassy. I'm also calling for the imposition of targeted economic sanctions and travel bans against named individuals, including Mr. Patrushev and Mr. Putin.
Well, we'll have reaction from Russia in just a moment, but first let's go live to London where we can speak to Simon McGregor-Wood. So Simon, we know now the report is out. What are some of the main conclusions that can be drawn?
Well, of course, the standout point is that the Judge Sir Robert Owens, in his 328-page report, points the finger of blame pretty comprehensively in the direction of President Putin himself. That was always the big issue here. We've always known that Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun, the prime suspects, were very much targeted by the tracing of this polonium isotope which was used to kill Mr. Litvinenko. But how far up the chain of command did this operation go? The judge feels clearly that this was a state-sanctioned killing of a man who was seen as a traitor, betraying the FSB, the Russian Federal Security Services, for whom he had worked, and that the polonium, such a rare and dangerous nuclear isotope, could only have been used if it had been approved for use at the very top of the chain, and therefore indicating that probably, a key word, probably, President Putin himself had approved the use of this material in the killing of Mr. Litvinenko. The report also says briefly that Mr. Putin had motive. There was a long-running personal feud between the two men. Mr. Putin, according to the report, saw Mr. Litvinenko and his campaigning in London as a British citizen, working for MI6, the British Secret Service, trying to link President Putin and his colleagues in the Kremlin with Russian organized crimes, with attempts to kill opposition figures, all terribly damaging to the reputation of Mr. Putin and the Kremlin. And that, according to this report, is why. That's the motive that Putin had to order his killing.
And quickly, if you will, Simon, awkward probably doesn't come close to the feeling the British government has at the moment after the findings of this report. Just how are they going to respond?
Well, we'll hear shortly from the Home Secretary, Theresa May, her reaction to this report and what she's going to do about it. We've heard strong condemnation and calls for action from Mr. Litvinenko's widow, Marina. She's been pushing this process all the time. She's calling for targeted sanctions. She's calling for diplomats to be kicked out of the Russian embassy in London and ramping up this situation between the UK government and Russia. Whether or not the British government will follow through on that, there are other issues that the British need the Russians for. Syria, Iran's nuclear program, all those sorts of big issues. We'll wait and see. On balance, I suspect the British government won't do that much.
Well, Simon, for now in London, thank you for that. Well, let's go to Moscow and speak to our reporter, Albina Kovalyova. Albina, what has been Russia's response to the findings?
Well, the Russian Foreign Ministry has called the inquiry today biased and also opaque. They said it was politically motivated, but also said there was no surprise of the outcome because of its biased nature. Now, Mr. Lugovoy, who has been found guilty to the murder of Mr. Litvinenko by the inquiry, has also commented today. He said the accusations against him were absurd. And he also said that this showed the UK's position, anti-Russian position, and also unwillingness to find those who are actually responsible for Mr. Litvinenko's death.
Now, Albina, we can probably have predicted that that would be the reaction from Moscow. But do you think that this could have lasting implications for the relationship between Russia and the UK?
Well, I think this is the real question, given the kind of diplomatic situation that we have between Russia and the West at the moment, given that there's enough tensions over Ukraine, given this scandal with Turkey recently. It is possible that the relations between Russia and the UK will get worse. But of course, a lot will depend on what the British government will actually propose to do following the inquiry. Back to you.
Albina Kovliova there for us for now in Moscow. Thank you very much.